This is Duke University.
Coming as an American student and your perspective as an American, what were some of your guys' experiences with being integrated into the society? When you went, was there like a day or a moment where you felt, okay, people are accepting me now as part of the community because I've stayed here for X amount of time? Or did you never really feel like you were part of a community there?
Weirdly, for me, I'm obviously British, you can tell. But something I noticed was whenever I went out with everyone else in my program was American. And whenever I went out, the Israelis were so much more receptive to my accent. They'd hear it and go berserk. Oh my God, you're British, let's hang out. And they'd hear the American accent, I'd be like, oh my gosh, no, to one side. And I think there's obviously complications behind why that's a status quo, but one of the biggest things for me was in Israel, it was seen as a perception that Americans were simply tourists. They weren't coming to settle in Israel. They would come for a very short period of time, experience the country and then leave. Whereas the way that the Brits were viewed was it was a complicated history and one that I thought, I was there during the time the Balfour Centennial was going on, so I thought I was going to get a bit more stick than I'd actually received. But they saw the British as inherently more part of the Middle Eastern history, as part of the culture for such a long time, that there wasn't as much. Obviously, this is nuanced and specific to the people I spoke to, not a generalized statement, but there wasn't as much reticence to my being there.
There's definitely a perception, especially in Fez, which is simultaneously such a historically rich yet poor city, that people who are American often come in, take photos of the stuff that's pretty, fake haggle, and then leave. And so that presence, we stayed in the old city part of Fez, and that had a presence while we were there, at least for a couple weeks. People were kind of indifferent to us. There was probably a group of 30 or 40 kids, all under the age of 12, who were playing, and to this day, we have no idea what the game was, but we just joined in. And I don't know, at some point we were being hit with like sticks, but also like part of the circle and moving around and running and all this stuff. And I think at first there was a certain degree of suspicion in the eyes of all the parents, but eventually they realized that we were just there to have a good time. And, then the kids were doing what kids do, which is like one after another just lining up to be carried. So then you're like exhausted by the end. But from that day on, walking around the neighborhood, we would see kids who recognized us and said hi, and the effect that had on how their parents treated us and how their friends treated us really was a turning point in how we felt integrated into the community.
So I definitely felt like in Jordan the people were extremely welcoming, and I would say I did really feel like integrated into the community, especially with my my coworkers. They were very welcoming. We would go out. It was during Ramadan. We would go to iftar dinners after work together, and I think a lot of why I felt very kind of in place with them socially was because they were all either had recently graduated, or still in university, and so that was really great. I think socially, getting to know people my own age and what people in Jordan did for fun or for in their free time at my age. So yeah, I definitely felt extremely welcome there.
So I have kind of a contrarian answer to this question. I'm not originally American at all, completely unhyphenated. I'm only Indian. But I think that being from an American university, especially when it's an American university like Duke, which is recognizable to some people, is not a heavy burden, but is definitely like kind of a tag that you have to carry when you're in the Middle East. And I remember kind of introducing myself to people, and they'd be like, "Where are you from?" And I'd be like, "Oh, India." And they'd be like, "No, where are you like from like in the U.S. And I was like, no, I'm not from the U.S. And they'd be like, then why do you go to school in the U.S.? And I'd be like, oh, well, Duke, blah, 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 really great university. And they kind of listen. And I mean, partly, I'm sure some of this is on my really bad Arabic. But they'd listen for a while and be like, okay, that's a good plan. So now you can marry someone and then you can stay in the States. And I'd be like, oh, I'd never thought of that. That's a great plan. I'll keep it in mind. But I think there is something to be said for being an American student and how that subsumes kind of your other identities, regardless of whether it's female or like having a different nationality, the way that I do. And in a very real sense, a lot of the things that you do reflect on Duke while you're in the Middle East, especially given that America has justified or unjustifiedly has a bad rep there. And I think that's something that a lot of Duke students sometimes don't keep in mind when they're going. And I think it works both ways, because the same way that some American students will look at one or two experiences and be like, oh, this is life here, the same way people are looking at you as a sample size of one and being like, this is what American students do. And I really don't think sometimes that people keep that in mind. And I think, especially in the Middle East, it's so, so important to keep that in mind, because everything you do is a reflection not just on you, but on like your school, your university, and then eventually America as a whole.
I completely understand what Amelia was saying. I also am not an American citizen, and being in Morocco was the first time that I was the American, like a visiting American. And it was funny because sometimes when my roommate and I would go shopping just for fun, I would say that I was from Venezuela instead of saying that I was from America. And the reactions that you get when you're an American student versus when you're like a Latin American tourist are just completely different. But so for the most part, when I was there at the program, I was an American student and we were a group of American students. And most of the times that just meant, I mean, reactions from people were different, obviously, but for a lot of the young people, and in Morocco there's a lot of frustrated young people who have done a lot of schooling and are incapable of finding work. So for a lot of the young people, an American student was just like, wow, like, lucky you. And it was always like this fascination. So I think for me it was also just a constant reminder of how incredibly privileged we were. And it was great because it meant that people were open to us because they knew that we were there to learn from them and to talk to them and to immerse ourselves in the society. And with lots of the people who Professor Lowe set us up with in Marrakesh and with the different cities, they were also excited to get to know us. So in that way, it facilitated a lot of things for us because we had so much help available. But it was definitely just a constant reminder of like I am so lucky to be able to travel and to be able to do all these things. And you would sit and listen to a Moroccan student who was so frustrated because they had been dying to go to Europe and had been dying to go to America and were just, desperately trying to find a job or like study abroad or do all these things that we were doing as well. But it was this constant dynamic of I know that I'm here because of all the opportunities that have been constantly provided to me. And here I am with people who are my age, same situation, studying the same things, interested in similar things, but they have so much less mobility.
That as much as we intellectually talk in America about the Arab world, the concept of the Arab world is really kind of there are a lot of challenges that you can make to it, and so something as simple as food taught me that lesson. So I wonder if there are any other kinds of lessons that cultural encounters, perhaps with food, perhaps something else, taught you about stuff you were learning in class.
Me being in Israel, and I was in Palestine for a bit, and Jordan as well, made me realize how little I know. And I think we all have some of those moments where I've been studying this for, I feel like a long time. I have such an interest in the area, but I know pretty much nothing. I sat down and started chatting to a guy who was from London, who's an Orthodox Jew converted, who moved to Jerusalem. And I sat and chatted to him for about, I think, 6 hours, that despite him having political views that may be completely different from my own, that I may never understand his religious beliefs, I was able to then and there connect with him on a personal level. And that really blew open my mind to not only Israel, but I think the region as a whole, because the narratives are so closed-minded and so simplified that the reality is so much more nuanced.
I can go. So I had a little bit of a different experience, and this is obviously on a little bit more of a serious note. I was living with Syrian refugees when I was in Jordan, and I think that the current refugee crisis gets talked about a lot, and I really mean that it dominates Middle Eastern discourse here at Duke, but also generally. at most American elite universities. And I think what I experienced from actually living with people that you kind of talk about every day is that there's a sense of disconnect that you have when you study people versus when you're with people.
Taking it because looking at gender through through an outsider's lens, and kind of saying, well, this is why people wear the hijab, or this is the roles that Islam dictates to women or dictates to men, and so all of a sudden to take it from a political standpoint or even a literature narrative standpoint and be put into that family situation, I still don't even know my own judgment after that. I don't understand, like I haven't been able to fully process it because it takes something that there's so much dialogue on and completely erases all the dialogue, and you're just living it, and none of it seems foreign. None of it you're not for or against any of the issues. It just is life there.